Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Central Arkansas Library System's Six Bridges Book Festival. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items that I wanted to get out of the way. I am going to drop the links to both of our authors' websites down in the chat, as well as a link to Cal's online bookstore for the festival. It's in conjunction with Wordsworth Books. And so I'm going to put that link down there so that you can buy these books at any point for yourself or for a friend. It is the best possible way to support these authors and support CALS and the programming that they're doing through the festival. And also buying books is just really fun, right? So I'll put those links down in the chat. If you would also please use the chat feature at any time throughout our discussion. What you can do is put your question for these authors in the chat, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. We would love for you to join in on this conversation at any point in time. So with that, we've got a nice little crowd here. So we've already got people excited in the chat. Okay, so we'll get started. My name is Rosemary Hallmark, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a brand designer and website designer here in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I am also an editor for the book review website Forever Young Adult, which has book club chapters all over the world and is also launching a newly redesigned website next month. I'm so excited to be here this afternoon with Jasmine Guillory and Cynthia Sweeney. I'm going to introduce both Jasmine and Cynthia and let them tell you a little bit about their books, and then we'll jump into discussion. As I previously mentioned, at any point throughout this hour, feel free to ask your questions for Cynthia or Jasmine in the chat, and I'll read as many of them as possible. So first up, joining us today is Jasmine Guillory. Jasmine is a New York Times bestselling author of 6 romance novels, including her most recent novel, While We Were Dating. Jasmine's books have been chosen as Reese Witherspoon book club picks, and her work has been featured in Oprah Magazine, Cosmopolitan, Bon Appetit, and Time. Hi, Jasmine. Thank you for being here today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm also joined by Cynthia Sweeney, who is also a New York Times bestselling author. Her debut novel, The Nest, spent more than 6 months on the New York Times bestseller list. It was a Goodreads Choice Award finalist and was named one of the best books of 2016 by NPR, Washington Post, Amazon. Too many places to list. That's what the link in the chat is for. Her newest book, Good Company, was published in April and was an instant New York Times bestseller and a Read with Jenna Today Show book club pick. Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for joining us as well.
Hi, Rosemary and Jasmine. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm so excited. Talk about Good Company. I am in it right now because I've got a couple of New York Times bestselling authors in this chat. I'm so excited. So While We Were Dating came out in July of this year. It's a romantic comedy about an actress and an ad executive who are sort of having a real life fling that they play up for the Hollywood cameras. Jasmine, can you tell us a little bit about the book in your own words?
Yeah, While We Were Dating, it's about Ben and Anna. Ben, as you said, is an advertising executive. Anna is a Hollywood actress. They meet because Anna is the star of the big ad campaign that Ben is working on. And they immediately have a connection that they both try to ignore. And then Ben helps Anna out with a family emergency, and then it gets a little too hard for them to ignore it, and they spend sort of the rest of the book figuring out what to do about that.
Yes, it was such a fun read too. I absolutely enjoyed every moment of it. And speaking of actors, Good Company is also about actors. Cynthia, your book features 2 married couples, best friends. When Flora finds her husband's wedding ring hidden away in storage, one he claimed to have lost many years ago while they were working for his small theater company, it throws everything she knew about her life, her marriage, and her friendship with TV actress Margot into chaos. Cynthia, please tell us more about your book.
It's hard to tell you more without getting spoilery.
That's true.
But I think really the book is about people in the arts who are trying to make a living, and they're not necessarily the most glamorous, the most famous, but people who are really trying to figure out how to make that life work. and the compromises that it requires. And especially within a relationship, Flora's husband is an actor, and they have a child. And so I think it's about reaching that point in your life when things aren't pure possibility anymore, and you have to say to yourself, like, this is my life. And then of course something happens to Flora to make her really doubt what she has believed her life to be. So she spends the rest of the book figuring out what to do about that.
And we kind of mentioned this, but I grew up, my parents owned a small theater company.
Yes.
Growing up. So as soon as I started reading the book, I was like, oh, I can relate to this. Okay. That's very
I'm happy
interesting
to hear that. Yeah.
Both of your books, I want to read a sentence or two from Good Company, because both of your books being about actors, there's a line in Good Company where you say, actors were the worst unreliable narrators, assigning meaning in retrospect, embellishing facts with imagined significance. While I was reading kind of both of your books, not quite simultaneously, but close, that really got me wondering, kind of while I was reading these books, about, when you're writing, how much a character's profession plays into their personalities and how they react to things. And more specifically, how does their being actors kind of play into that character development? Is that something that you kind of played around with when you were writing? Either Cynthia, if you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think work is really important in books and fiction. It's obviously an important part of our lives, but I get frustrated when I read books and I don't actually know what the people care about, what they're doing, what their work is. It's something I love about Jasmine's books, is that all of her characters have careers and jobs, and that drives the narrative. And I'm not sure how to write a book without that. But I am lucky. I have a lot of friends who are like Margot and Julian and Flora, in the sense that they are at different points of their careers, or they have different kinds of careers. And so I bought a lot of people lunches, and I acquired a lot of stories. And yeah, I mean, actors it takes a certain kind of ego to do that work. You really have to believe in yourself. And sometimes you have to tell yourself stories about yourself. We all tell ourselves stories about ourselves, but I think it's a little heightened when that is literally your job. So I thought a lot about what the reader would think about these people versus what they thought about themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And Jasmine's, in your book, I know Anna's not necessarily, I don't want to say she's manipulating the paparazzi, right? But she's playing to her advantage. Yeah, she is a little bit. She's using being an actress to her advantage, right? So it's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, and I really agree with everything Cynthia said. And I also think that, like, when you're acting, there's so much of it that you have to play up every emotion that you ever had, right? You have to, like, dig down into, like, oh, when I can use this from 3 years ago for this. And so you have to really, all of your emotions have to be heightened, which sometimes that's great for your career. Sometimes that's difficult for you as a person who relates to other people. And so I think that's something that can really, you definitely learn how to sometimes manipulate people, but sometimes not, like how to manipulate yourself a little bit in good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, yeah, I mean, what someone has to learn for their career and for their passion really does play a role in, like, what kind of a person you are and how you relate to other people.
That makes sense. So how do you research? So when you're writing these characters and their professions, do you reach out to people? Do you read up on these professions? How do you go about researching for a book?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I reach out to people and ask if they'll talk to me, which people are really very generous about their time. I found, I read when I was working on While We Were Dating, I read a lot of, like, celebrity memoirs, just sort of like, and pulled kind of little things out of there that, because there's a lot of certain things in common, and not everyone is the same. Obviously, everyone has different experiences, but that really helped me. And just like having conversations with people, I found that one of the hardest things for me during the pandemic has been to not be able to have those casual conversations with people that like teach you about characters. So I really had to either dig down into conversations I've had in the past, reach out to people, you know, talk on the phone or online or on video calls and things like that, just to find out kind of what makes people tick and what, you know, I think some of the superficial things about lives, but also a lot of the inner stuff about lives too is what's really most important to me.
What about you, Cynthia?
Yeah, same. I mean, it's a lot of everything. I read a lot of memoirs. I read a lot of you know, just books about theater. I read some acting books. I read, you know, about different techniques. Like I said, I bought a lot of people lunch and got some of their stories. I listened to podcasts that featured actors. I found, you know, there's a lot of theater work in my book, and I found this wonderful podcast called Back to One, which is just, I'm sorry to say I've forgotten the host's name, but he writes for like Cinema Magazine or something like that. And he just talks to actors and he sort of asks them all the same 4 questions about process and craft. And, you know, they're all 20 to 30 minutes. And that was invaluable to me, to listen to people talk about how they prepare for stage work and how they viewed their careers and what's important to them. And yeah, that was really, really a great find. So
cool. We've got a question from an audience member. Let me read this out loud. Have you two found that as well-known authors with established fan bases, like actors, do you ever find yourself having to set firm boundaries with fans? Writing can be solitary, but then there's that whole promoting the book and being on sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like I still feel brand new to this. Like my first book just came out in 2018, which granted 2020 did last for about 6 years. That does feel like forever ago, but so it does feel, so it always feels strange to me that like there are people out there in the world who have read my books and know who I am. And the funniest part for me is like I live in Oakland, California, which is where I grew up. And so I also like look exactly the same as I have my entire life, except you know, older. And so I am used to like running into people on the street who I went to like elementary school with. And now occasionally that will happen, but it's like someone who's read my books, and I'm like, that's wild. I am mostly appreciative. And I think that like, I mean, I haven't really had any bad experiences, and I'm just delighted that there are people out there in the world who have read my books and like them and are excited about them.
What about you, Cynthia?
I mean, I think like, you know, famous for a writer is like really like in a different key than famous for someone else. But I think I was completely unprepared for the success of The Nest, and that was a trip, and that was something that I was not used to feeling publicly vulnerable in any way. I never in a million years imagined that would happen to me. And so that was something I had to figure out how to manage, mostly just personally, how I felt about myself. I felt very unworthy of attention. And so that was something that took a little therapy, to be honest. But the rest of it has been just wonderful. And people who love books, by and large, are just enthusiastic, lovely, engaging, intelligent, really interesting people. And so it's been great. And I'm so sad I didn't get to go on tour with Good Company, because after you know, 2.5 years of sitting in my office by myself working on this book. The reward is bringing it out to the world and engaging with readers. And this has been great. And thank God we have this, but it's not the same as meeting people in person. And they, you know, they tell you things in a signing line that are often lovely and poignant in their own stories. And I really hope, I'm really crossing my fingers that when the paperback comes out in the spring, I will get to meet some readers in person. So
I hope so
yeah,
too.
I feel just the same way. Like there was a book event that I did a few years ago that I still think about, because it was like in the middle of a really busy month, and I'd been like flying from one place to another, and I'd like gotten there that morning and I was grumpy and I hadn't slept, and I was like, oh, all this travel. And then I did this book event and it was so wonderful. And you know, someone in the signing line was like, you know, your books got me through a really hard time, and like she teared up and then I teared up, and like you can't, I am so appreciative of virtual events, and I'm so glad that we've gotten to this, but those are the kinds of things that like you can't replicate. And so I'm just like so grateful for every reader who has told me something like that. Like those are the things that I didn't expect at all.
Yeah,
that's lovely. So both of you actually have really interesting kind of backstories about how you ended up writing. This was not something that you started, you know, you didn't major in, you know, creative fiction or whatever in college. This is, Jasmine, you went to Stanford Law School, right? Like you were like doing law work for the San Francisco Federal District Court. So how do you end up, you know, with 6 romance novels under your belt in just a few years? What was the trajectory there?
First of all, speaking of college, I just have to do a tiny shout out to my college roommate who is from Little Rock, who I'm very sad that I'm not seeing in person today, Carrie. But yeah, I was a lawyer. That's what I like wanted to be my whole life. And then I was working in a job where I realized kind of in the second year, like, oh, we just do the same thing over and over again. Okay, that's fine. But like now I realize, you know, I had been a lawyer for I guess about 6 years at that point, and I realized that I was missing out on learning something new. Like I missed that experience of being in school and figuring something else out. And so I started thinking about like, and I'd worked at a law firm for a while where I had no free time. And that now I was at a job where I had free time, and I was like, well, I need to do something other than just like going home and watching television for hours every day. Like I need something else. And so I kind of started thinking, and I've always been a big reader my whole life. And I had always kind of shied away from the idea of writing. I think I thought it was not for me. But I had friends who were writers, and I had kind of tentative conversations with them about like, do you think I could do this? And they were really supportive. And so I just sort of dove in and started writing a novel, which was not my first novel that was published. That took a while. But that's when I learned that I really loved it. Like I was excited to come home every night and kind of dive into a story and have something else, and I, had to feel my way through. Everything I've learned about writing, I've like not learned in school. Like I've learned from mostly reading other books, and listening to writers talk and experimenting myself. But so it took a few years, and then finally I wrote The Wedding Date, which was the book that got me my agent and was my first published book. And
Cynthia, you worked in publishing, right? And decided to get your
No, I didn't. I did something sort of adjacent to what you're doing. I was a marketing and branding writer for most of my adult life. I was a journalism major in college and sort of went into corporate communications. And when my husband was a lawyer who left to do stand-up comedy and become a television writer. So he had a very intense job, and we had a couple of kids, and so that work was great for me because I freelanced most of the time, and I could sort of work it around my parenting. And then, you know, as my kids were getting older, the job was changing a lot because of something called the internet. And we moved to Los Angeles, and I felt like I can't do this work anymore. It's not interesting to me. The most important thing is not flexibility. I need to figure out what I want to do for the rest of my life that I feel passionate about. And I knew what that was. It took a while for me to admit it to myself, because I had tried writing fiction in my 20s. And in retrospect, just I was too young and didn't stick with it, and whatever, more therapy. But anyway, I started taking writing classes at the UCLA Writers Extension, and one of the teachers there, I realized, much like Jasmine, I have read fiction voraciously my entire life, that I had absorbed lessons of novels. And I knew from being a different kind of writer for so long that I wasn't doing certain things right, certain craft things I didn't understand. And I knew someone could teach me those things. And I was about to turn 50, and I really wanted to accelerate that process. So I went to a low residency program for my MFA in fiction, the Bennington Low Residency Writers MFA program, and it was phenomenal. And I started the Nest at the end of that program. And it was, you know, a dreamy 2 years where all I did was think about fiction and try and figure out how to write it and how to put together a novel. And that was that.
The dream, truly.
Yeah.
We've got another question. Both writers also write so wonderfully about food. Wondering if either of you have ever considered writing a companion cookbook based on the books or characters, or just writing a cookbook in general.
One of my favorite novels of all time is Heartburn. I go back to it all the time whenever I want to remind myself that the most important thing is that I find my voice in whatever book I'm writing. That novel is just pure voice. And I remember reading it in my 20s and thinking, you can do this? Like you can write like this and be funny and put recipes in. But that, to me, it just like sits on a pedestal. And I also really love Laurie Colwin, who she's one of my favorite fiction writers and is also a marvelous food writer. But I don't like, food and cooking is just fun to me. I don't want to make it my job.
I feel exactly the same way, right? And especially since, like, I don't want to make, I love everything about my current job. I love that I get to write fiction for a living, but it does change your relationship to writing and to reading. You know, when I was working on the wedding tape before I got published, it was a very different experience than it is for me to write a book now, when I know that like I have deadlines and stuff. And so I don't like, I accept that relationship has changed. I love the things that it has brought to me. And I love being able to write fiction. I think it's a joy to me every day, but I don't want to have that exchange with food and cooking. Like, I want to just be able to make Thanksgiving dinner for my family without thinking about, will other people want this recipe or not? I don't care.
Yeah. How many words is this going to be?
Yeah. I don't want to have to stop and measure things. I just want to throw stuff.
Yeah. The fastest way to make sure you never cook dinner again is So Jasmine, you as a romance writer, I know there's a lot of in the romance genre, the whole concept of the happily ever after, right? Is like, is it even a romance novel if it doesn't have a happily ever after? How do you approach that? So one of the questions I was thinking about with both of your books, they both kind of are about love, but in totally different ways, right? So Jasmine, you're writing up to the happily ever after, while Cynthia is writing about kind of the 20 years past, like everything that happens after the happily ever after. When you start writing, do you kind of know the path that you're about to take your readers on in terms of where you're going to end up? How do you when you're starting out, do you think like, I know that this is going to be a bumpy road, but I know how it's going to end? I'm very curious from both of you.
For me, it has really not anymore. For me, it has really changed. I used, like, at the very beginning, I think I did know that when I wrote my first 2 books, I think I did know that. And maybe because I spent a lot longer before I started writing thinking about them. So I kind of knew a lot more about who the characters were once I dove in. But now I think for me, the first draft is often figuring out who these characters are. And so I can't, like, I don't know what the happily ever after is going to be until I know what makes these people happy, right? And so for me, writing the first half of the book, I'm kind of fumbling my way through. There's often scenes that I write that I kind of know while I'm writing them, this is wrong, but I'm not quite sure what right is. And then I will like get to that point where I'm like, this is it. I know it now. And then a lot of times, like, I'll have to like go back and fix a lot of stuff, but it's really, I have to get my way to knowing who the characters are, what the thing is that's gonna make both of them, you know, that's gonna make them fall in love with one another and that's gonna make them happy. And so like, you can't, because every happily ever after is different, right? And so I can't get there until I know exactly who I'm writing about. And so for me, a lot of times it takes a little while for me to get there, but then once I do, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I don't know. And similarly to what Jasmine said, I'm sort of groping my way through the first 100 pages, trying to figure out who the characters are, where the heat is in the story. And then at some point you've made enough decisions so certain avenues are closed. It's like the road gets narrower and narrower. I had a writer friend tell me once, actually one of my mentors in my graduate program, to say that it helps to know where you want your characters to leave off emotionally. And I do try and think about that. Are they going to be happy? Are they going to be sad? Is this, but honestly, with Good Company, I did not know. I put off writing the last few chapters of that book until I could not put it off anymore. And a pandemic happened and there was literally nothing else to do. And because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I just had to sort of lead myself there in a way that felt true to the people involved. I do feel very responsible for that.
Yeah.
No, the whole time I was reading Good Company, I was like, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what she should do. I don't know what she's gonna do. So that was a really interesting, I think, one thing that I thought about a lot when I was reading Good Company, especially, was, will this have a happy ending? Does everyone have happy endings? I don't know, but I know where I can find a happy ending, and that's in Jasmine's book. So. We got another question here. I'm such a fan of both books, and I'm curious, who from While We Were Dating would be most likely to enjoy Good Company, and who from Good Company would be most likely to enjoy While We Were Dating?
Ooh, wow.
I feel like that's a good question.
I feel like honestly, I feel like Margot would love, I feel like when she's on set, that's exactly what she would want in her library, or any of Jasmine's books, to like come back out in during a break and just like reset and read something smart and funny and engaging. And yeah.
You know, it's funny. Someone just said, I think Theo would be all over Good Company. I think that's right. And I also think that Anna would be a huge fan. I think that she would really get into it. Yeah.
Anna would totally appreciate stories about other actors,
yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Agreed. So let's see. We both of these books also kind of feature multiple points of view. And so I'm wondering if when you're writing, do you how do you feel like a multiple points of view sort of helps to sort of tell your story? And do you find that there are some voices that are easier to write than others?
Yes, for me, absolutely. It's funny because the book that I wrote after While We Were Dating is the first book that I've written in a long time that only had one point of view, and it was so much harder for me because I think I had to actually like kind of practice a little bit in other points of view to really figure out what was going on in the story and what other people were thinking. Like for me, one thing that I had to do in other drafts was to think like, well, what are the other people in this scene thinking about right now? Because that's something that I'm forced to do while writing books with other points of view. And so I don't even have to do it on purpose. I don't have to, because I know in the next scene, they're going to be thinking about that. And so I have to know what their perspective is. And so, so I think that's something that really helps me figure out who these characters are, because I have to know not only what they're thinking in their head for every scene they're in, but also about like scenes that they're sort of only a part of. I have to know their whole picture. So that is something that like really does help me. I will say it is funny because usually for me, it's much easier for me to get into the head of the female characters that I write. But in While We Were Dating, like Ben flew out of my head like he was, a fully formed human being. I just knew who he was within a few chapters. I was like, oh, this is like, there was a scene I wrote very early on, and then very quickly I was like, Ben would never do that. And I just sort of like knew that. And so that like, he was just one of the easiest characters I've ever written for me.
What about you, Cynthia?
Yeah, I mean, I love rotating point of view as a reader. So it's what I gravitate to as a writer. It's also just for a very practical standpoint of if I'm having a hard time with somebody, I can, on a certain day, I can turn to somebody else. So it's a relief. And yeah, I mean, I in Good Company, I rarely have the experience where a character just is there. And Ruby, Flora and Julian's daughter, just came to me. It was like she showed up and sat in my office and started talking. And it was sheer joy. Every word of hers that I wrote was fun and fast. And that doesn't happen too often. So I really loved that.
Do you ever think whenever these characters come to you so quickly that maybe they're very loosely based on somebody that you know or that you've met? Like, where do these people come from?
You know what's funny is writing Ben was so easy for me that I was like, this must be coming from somewhere, but it definitely wasn't. Like, he's definitely not anybody I know. It's just like, sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes
yeah, exactly.
And I was just grateful. Yeah.
I think, I mean, the worst thing I can do to myself when I'm writing a character is to try and think about a real person that I know that they're like. That will stop me in my tracks. And so I can take details from someone or, maybe something that they've said. But really, the joy of writing fiction is making up people who are maybe people you could know, but are not exactly people you know. But when my agent read, sort of the first complete draft of Good Company, he called me up and said, I have to ask you. And this is my literary agent. Like, he knows better than to ask this question. And then he just said, is Ruby based on someone? She's so there and she's so present. And I was like, I don't know who she is, but I'm just grateful she showed up. And yeah, I don't know. It's sort of it's kind of the magic of it, doing the work every day, is sometimes the universe gives you this
Gives
stuff.
you a little present. Gives you a little present.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat said, I was hoping Jasmine had I once dated a backup dancer story. No? Too bad. I did love Ben though. I also loved that Ben was so open with the reader and with Anna about being in therapy. We even like kind of, we get to go along with him to therapy in a few scenes. I mean, I feel like really both books kind of dive into characters going to therapy to help with their relationships and to help with their mental health. Do you feel like the last few years you've seen kind of a turn in the way that therapy is represented in media and in books?
I mean, I feel like after this past year and a half, I would hope so, right? Like, we all need that. Like, we all need more mental health, more conversations about mental health, and more productive ones. And so I think, that's something definitely everybody I know was thinking and talking about, and has been for the past 2 years. And so so I have seen a lot more of that lately, and I just hope it continues, because goodness, we all need it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I'm reading like older romance novels from early aughts and the late 90s or whatever, the difference between your romantic hero then, who's the tall, dark, and brooding type, and now we've got this like backup dancer who's in therapy. We're like, hot. That is so hot. Cynthia, when you were writing, did you feel like Julian being in couples therapy with Flora, and really there's kind of a neat scene with the actual therapist who,
yeah,
I really enjoyed that thing.
I wrote more of Maud, the therapist, and it just didn't really belong in the book, so I had to cut it out, which kind of broke my heart, because she also came to me very easily. And I lived in New York City for 27 years. Like, everyone was in therapy. I mean, I remember being like a sort of new mom in the playgrounds of Manhattan and meeting people, and everyone had a therapist, and going home. And I think I put this in the book. I think I gave this to Flora, just going home and saying to my husband, like, everyone I know is in therapy. Should I be in therapy? And the answer is yes. Everyone should be in therapy.
Yes.
So yeah, but it was just fun writing sort of a quintessential New York City Upper West Side therapist.
Agreed. She was really fun to read. And Samantha in the chat says Maud needs her own book. She is a leading lady.
I could not agree more.
Compile all those deleted scenes.
Yeah.
Let's give Maud her own. Let's give Maud a backup dancer romance.
Yeah.
Let's just bring it all together. So when you're writing now, I know it's kind of different when you're just starting out, but when you're writing now, do you take an idea for a book to your agent and say, this is my idea, should I write it? Do you just start writing and hope for the best? What is the kind of difference now that when you write a new book as opposed to your first book?
I've had the idea for the next book for a long time. And in fact, when I was starting Good Company, I sort of told my agent both ideas, and he was like, do Good Company and do what would become Good Company, because the other one was maybe going to involve family money again, and neither one of us really, I didn't really want to do that again. So I take some time off between books. I need to replenish my brain, especially in this world where I'm not leaving my house. So I'm sort of in the thinking, taking notes phase of the next book. And ordinarily I would wait until I had at least, I don't know, 40 45 pages to show someone to get their feedback on it, just to say, does this feel like a book to you? But I did call my agent, my editor, like at the end of the summer, because I can't figure out what decade this book should take place in, whether the backstory is actually the book. So we had a conversation about that, and I think consensus has been reached, but I haven't started writing yet, so I'm not sure.
What about you, Jasmine?
I tend to not. I need to know a certain core amount of information about a book before I talk to anybody about it. And so there was a while when I kind of had a general idea of something I wanted to write about next, but I wasn't really sure where that something would be. And then I kind of had the idea for the hook around it. But it wasn't until I didn't really talk to my agent about it until I was a little while deep into writing it, because I needed to know that it felt like a book to me before I could have any kind of conversation about it. And so it is funny because I'd gone back. I mean, my poor editor, I hadn't told her anything about While We Were Dating until I was deep into writing it. And she knew that I had a deadline, she knew that a book was coming, but she knew very little about the book. And because I had, when I had gotten the deal for this book, I had sort of pitched her a few different things. And so she was, she sort of knew it might be one of those things, but she didn't know anything. And then she sent me an email last summer that was basically do you have a title for the next book? And I was like, no. And he was like, we're having a cover meeting. Do you no don't talk about that. and then a few weeks later she sent another email no rush, but and I was like, all right, I don't have a title, but here's what the book is about. Help me come up with a title. And that my publishing team helped me come up with While We Were Dating, which is the perfect title for it. But it usually takes, I have to be in a certain place in the book to really, and it was funny because in the 3 weeks in between, when she'd first emailed and when she emailed back, then I was like, okay, I got it. I am not ready for anyone to look at it at all, but at least I know I have my mind around the book in a way that I didn't before.
Yeah. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask these. Let's see. Alice wants to know, do either of you have a favorite while writing snack?
I snack all day when I'm writing. It's I eat a lot of nuts, and I drink a lot of tea, and there we go through a lot of hummus in this house. So those are kind of my little. If I had cheese, I don't keep a lot of cheese in the house because I would literally eat it
for
morning,
safety,
noon, and
right?
night. Yeah.
Right.
So and I guess fruit.
That's nice to keep fruit in there. I love fruit a lot. I do not snack on it while I'm writing. I don't keep in my house because I would eat the entire box in 2 days, or Cheez-Its. There is no box of Cheez-Its large enough for me not to eat the entire box in 2 days. So I just don't let myself buy it. But potato chips have really gotten me through the last 3 books. I would say.
Through some hard writing times.
A lot of potato chips in my life. I drink a lot of sparkling water. I am that point early in the pandemic. Yes, exactly. The point early in the pandemic where we were only going to grocery stores every 2 weeks.
Right.
I had to ration my sparkling water. So because I was I have a certain amount, therefore I can only drink 2 cans a day, and that was hard for me. So yes, I was very grateful to be able to like start going back to the grocery store more often. Well, and then I would just like, one time I was at Target and the guy working at Target was replenishing the shelves and like started making fun of me for how many I was putting in my cart, because I was like,
Yeah.
I actually need more of this. So yeah, it's out of sparkling water.
Samantha wants to know which other writers are exciting you lately.
Oh, that's a great question. I loved Sam Kofa, which is by, I'm blanking on her name now. I have the book in another room. But it's the newest Reese Book Club pick. It is about a woman in her 40s in London who, like, her mother dies and she realizes, and she never had a relationship with her father, and she finds an old journal of her father's and discovers that he was it like after he dated her mother. Oh, thank you, Alice. After he dated her mother, discovered that he went home to his small country in Africa and became the dictator of that country. And the rest of the book is her discovering more about him and going to meet him. And so I really love that book. It was the first book of hers that I'd read, and now I want to read everything that she has read. So that is most recently.
I always feel like I'm in a weird, I'm catching up on books I wasn't reading while I was finishing Good Company, or I'm reading books that aren't coming out until next year. So it's always, but I did just read the new book by Elizabeth Strout called Oh William, which is a Lucy Barton novel. It's the third in the Lucy Barton books, and it's absolutely beautiful. And then I did put this on my table. I prepared myself for this question. This book, Olga Dies Dreaming, is coming out in January. I think the first week in January, and it's by Xochitl Gonzalez, and it is about a wedding planner in Brooklyn, and her family's Puerto Rican. Her mother is a Puerto Rican revolutionary. She's sort of left the children to go back to Puerto Rico to join this very underground revolutionary group. The protagonist of the book grows up with her grandparents, and it's funny, it's beautiful. And I love Xochitl's story. She was a wedding planner. She had her own wedding planning business for many years and decided she wanted to write this novel, and she wrote it, and she went to Iowa Writers Workshop, and it was bought while she was there, and it's being made into a television show now. It's just the best story, and she's this very ebullient, exuberant person. So just look out for Olga Dies Dreaming first week in January. I think it's probably going to be a big book. So
you both kind of mentioned something I want to go back to just now. Reese's Book Club. Jasmine, I know you had a book chosen for Reese's Book Club, and Cynthia, you were in the Jenna Hager's book club as well. Do you feel what does that feel like to be chosen, to have your books chosen for these celebrity book clubs?
Well, I mean, to have a book coming out during the pandemic where there was no book tour, and to get word that I was going to be Jenna's pick, and to understand that it was going to have all this exposure, I felt like I won the lottery. Honestly, it was so, and she's super lovely, and she's a real true blue reader, as I think all of the people who run these book clubs are. They're not doing it for money, they're doing it for love. And so I'm so grateful to her and everyone at the Today Show for exposing my book to a new audience. I felt very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it feels right. It feels like winning the lottery. I mean, it is very unexpected and exciting, and it is a whole new audience, because I had the proposal. My second book was the Reese Book Club pick, there were already people who had read The Wedding Date, but it is a very different and much bigger audience that really sees you and who your books are, and that is exciting and completely wild.
I never know if you can or if you even want to talk about this kind of thing, but I mean, there's also been like rumors for both of you getting optioned for film, maybe?
Well, Hello Sunshine owns the options for my first 4 books. So let's all just keep our fingers crossed. I mean, I think the pandemic has made everything difficult with regards to film and, I mean, everything, but
Sure.
Yes.
really, I think with regards to anything going on in Hollywood. So I would be delighted if anything exciting happened with that.
Yeah. I mean, The Nest is in development right now at AMC as a limited series, but it's, there's so many miles to go between option and something you actually see on TV, and a very small percentage of books that get optioned actually end up being a television show or a movie. The Nest lived at Amazon for some years as a feature film, and then I took the option back because it wasn't really going anywhere. And I mean, it's great, and that's like an extra little icing on the cake, but that's not, I didn't write novels to make a TV show.
Right.
It is funny, and I think this also goes back to the question about, like, do you have a person in mind when writing? People will often ask me if I.
Oh my God.
Like,
Yes.
I never. Sometimes I've had to like get friends to give me ideas and write them down.
Yes.
So I have an answer for that, because I always have a very clear picture in my mind of what my characters look like, and they're not an actual human person.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
that is often I have such a hard time answering that question, because I never know who
It
would.
is. Yes. I am with you 100%. And I have actually, if there's an opportunity, I ask people not to ask me that question because I'm like a deer in the headlights every single time. And I don't really retain the names of actors, even ones I love. I have a little actor face blindness sometimes. Like, we'll be watching a TV show and my husband will say, "Oh, look who it is." And I'm like, "Who?" Like, it's the character, Yeah, it's like, and so I never ever think of that. And sometimes I'm not even 100% sure what my characters look like, but I hear their voices very clearly in my head. But I don't, that is not a shortcut I take.
It's like when someone asks you where you want to go for dinner and suddenly you forget every restaurant in town.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, who do you want to play these parts? And it's like
Yeah.
a person in Hollywood.
Yeah. I was doing a television show in Canada for The Nest, and it was kind of like their version of The View, I think. And they started out by just saying who they all picked, like what actors they had decided should play the characters. And I guess my face looked, I don't know what my face looked like, but they were like, "Oh, you don't like these suggestions." I'm like, "No, I just don't even know who these people are."
Right. Sure, that sounds right. I mean,
yeah. So I want to give everyone in the chat one last chance to ask any questions if they've got them. We're kind of down to our last 10 minutes or so. So last call for questions in the chat. While people if they're coming up with more questions, I wanted to ask you both about upcoming projects. If you've got anything in the works, if we should be on the lookout for anything new coming from either one of you.
My next book is called By the Book. It is a Disney retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It comes out next May. So
that's exciting.
Yeah.
I am a much slower writer than Jasmine. I'll see you in 3 years.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
Figure that one out. So you said a Disney retelling, so that's, I mean, like Disney
books. Yes.
Wow, cool. Oh, I love that. And is it adult romance? Yeah.
It's adult romance. Yes.
Awesome. That's so exciting.
That's amazing.
Well, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna, I don't see any other, let me go through and just make sure I didn't miss anyone's questions. before we, Samantha really appreciates, Jasmine, that you are matching your book cover.
Oh,
We've got, so everyone just is so thankful for you guys for being here. Oh, hold on, one more. What is it? Let's find out. We got a little bit of time. Let's see. At the 5-minute mark. Oh, if there was any location that you could travel to and then set your book there, where would you go?
The answer is always Italy, Italy, Italy. In fact, when I first started conceiving of Good Company, I had them all traveling to a place in Italy that was maybe Margot's, parents' house. And I mean, it was just it was literally just an excuse for me to have to go. I need to go to Italy
Yes.
for research. And
business trip, yes.
yeah, my agent very wisely said to me about that setup. He said, well, that is a very particular kind of book. Two couples in a foreign location, and is that the book you're writing? And I was like, no, you're right, it's not the book I'm writing. Damn it, but it's going to be the next book I'm writing.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to say Italy, but that's mostly just for an excuse for me to go there. I mean, that or Hawaii, but
yeah,
But also, I feel like a book set in Hawaii, like what could I do other than being like, and they're just happy all the time.
Yeah, there's no conflict.
Yeah.
Can't be mad. You can't be mad in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I have a question. For Jasmine.
Let's hear it.
So you are so good at writing sex in a way that is hot and romantic and true to the characters. And I think that that's incredibly hard. I think writing sex is important because you learn so much about a character. I think it's really important to character. It's up there with money and job. And I'm just wondering if that, because it's hard for me, and I'm wondering if you have to, do you have to have a glass of wine? Do you does it, I'm just really curious about that part of your books because you're so good at it.
So one thing is that I have to write in order. I know people who can jump around. It can be like, it's time in this book to write a sex scene, but I am not in the mood for it right now. I will have to, and I have to just make myself plow through. So when it's time, I'm like, all right, well, I guess you're just gonna do
Here we
this
go.
now. Here we go. So yeah, I just have to. I mean, I think for me, I have to really know the characters to a certain extent first. And so even in my books where there has been sex relatively early, I usually don't go into a ton of detail yet because I can't, because it feels like I don't know them well enough. I only know certain things about them. And so it really does change as I get to know the characters more. And I just sort of have to go with what feels right. To a certain extent. And I always, it's funny because while I'm writing the scene, it feels totally normal to me. And while I'm editing, I'm blushing up a storm.
Well, that makes sense though, because when you're writing it, you're in it.
Oh my God, I can't believe I just heard that. Yeah.
I mean, do you feel like the sex scenes that you write, do your family members read your books? Has this affected Thanksgiving dinner at all?
Okay, well, do you know what's so funny is my family members do read my books. Apparently my very conservative aunt, who's the oldest in my family, my dad is one of 8 kids and she's the oldest, loves my books, and I'm like, really? Marilyn? So I try to pretend that does not happen.
There was I follow a lot of
my dad read The Wedding Date. I don't think he's read any of my books since then. He buys them all, but I don't think he's read any of them, which I think is for the best.
I follow a lot of romance writers on Twitter, and the girl took a picture once. She had written her first romance novel and her dad wanted to read it, and she had whited out all the sex scenes and written in a PG version instead. And I always wonder for romance writers, like, you know, is your mom, is your
I just
dad?
have to pretend I do not have family. Although the funniest thing that happened was when my grandmother had an advance copy of The Wedding Date. My sister asked her, like, you know, how are you dealing with all the sex in Jasmine's book? And my grandmother said, I had 3 husbands.
Yeah.
I was like, all right then, Grandma. Okay.
I mean, listen, we've all done it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, we're kind of out of
We end
time,
on
and
that note.
I am so glad we're ending on this exact note. This is a really high note to go out on. This has been so much fun. Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Jasmine, for joining us. The Six Bridges Book Festival, and thank you, of course, to all of our attendees who joined us and asked questions. I really appreciate you guys all coming and listening and giving us your input. As a reminder, I'll go ahead and copy and paste it again, but I've got links to both Cynthia and Jasmine's websites, so you can learn more about them and their other books. And I'm also including the link to the PAL's online bookstore for the festival, so that you can buy their books, and you can buy books from any of the authors who are speaking this week, all available through Wordsworth. And yeah, I think we're kind of out of time. So once again, thank you guys so much. It's been so much fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Yes, agreed. All right. Well, I think that's it.
Bye, Rosemary.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah.